Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Michelle Hynes in Portland, Oregon. Michelle is a coach and a consultant with deep roots in mission-focused organizations. She has a passionate interest in how people navigate planned and unplanned change. Michelle helps to ease transitions, nurture growth, and create supportive structures for teams. Michelle, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Angela.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. We're going to focus a lot today on the unplanned change part of the job search. And I mentioned to you, I've recently met with a number of folks who were let go kind of unexpectedly. And I've kind of got that kind of experience in mind as we talk. My first question for you is, from your perspective, what is one of the hardest things about the unplanned change, like being let go without knowing that it's coming?
Well, I think just to broaden the perspective a little bit and then come back to that specific situation, I think that what feels hard about unplanned career change really varies by what's driving it. So the situation you're describing, an unplanned sudden set of layoffs, is one hard situation, but it can also be driven by, changing industry or family relocation, or your job moves but you can't move, right? So all of those things are going to have their own reasons for feeling difficult. But I think one of the things that all of these unplanned shifts have in common is that there's a loss of security and a loss of identity. And when something like that happens with no warning, you've got to make at least two big shifts fast. And it's a shock to the system.
Absolutely. I think the other thing, it hits me as you're talking and I'm thinking about it, it's also this feeling of loss of control. If you've been in charge of your career for, so many years and all of a sudden, well, I didn't plan for this. This isn't what I wanted. That sort of thing. It's right. Man, it's tough. And you're right, relocation or having your company relocate when you can't go, or there's tons of other changes that are also very outside of our control that can definitely impact our career.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, so I would think that one of the number one things we could do would be maybe to reach out to people. From your perspective, when is the right time to reach out to your sort of existing network of friends and colleagues for support, and why should we do this?
So I think that it's important to reach out as soon as you feel able to, right? So in an unplanned change, especially those of us who are introverts might need to take a little bit of time to absorb the news before we feel ready to reach out. But throughout the transition, you're going to need different kinds of support. You're going to need personal support. You're going to need professional support. You might need specific support for learning new skills. So you're definitely going to want the support of, let's say, your immediate family or household, but you also want to begin to reach out to mentors, to colleagues who are still employed, maybe to your faith community. I always recommend starting with people close to you who you trust, because it's easier to begin to tell your story and to ask for help in that close-in network, but also to think about not leaning only on the people in your immediate household, because this is also a stress for them.
That's a great point. So say we do reach out to people, whether it's our former colleagues or you mentioned our faith community, we reach out to somebody. How do you recommend that we go about reaching out? I mean, what do we say and how do we ask?
So a little bit of it depends on the nature of the relationship, right? You're going to say something different to your best friend than to your longtime mentor at your first job. But I would be honest about what's happened, right? As you might have heard, I got laid off last week, and I am asking people who are close to me to help me through this transition. Could you sit down and have coffee with me? Could you help me look at my resume? Could you look at my LinkedIn profile when I have it ready? Can I call you when I'm feeling down and I don't know what to do next? Like, think about all of the things that you might need to support you. Again, both personally in terms of like keeping the stamina and resilience that a new job search is going to require, and also professionally, who can you introduce me to so that I can expand my network beyond the people I might know? Who might be a great person to look at my resume when I haven't done one in 10 years? You're going to need a few different things. So as you identify them, think about who you can ask and how specific you can be.
I think that's a great point. And something else you just mentioned I think is really important is it sounds like you're talking about almost assembling a team of people. Like you're not relying on just one person to help you with everything. You're thinking about these different needs and different people because each person maybe can give you a few hours that are going to add up to a lot of time, but probably one person can't give you 40 hours. So, so it's probably spreading out sort of that support over a network. Another thing you mentioned was that sometimes when you first get laid off, you said, especially if you're an introvert, maybe you need to take a little time or this is a little harder. From a timing perspective, how much time is a little time before we should start reaching out to people? If we need to take some time off, like what does that look like?
So this is a big loss, right? Even if you didn't love your job, as we talked about at the beginning, you have a loss of control, you have a loss of security, you have a loss of identity, maybe very suddenly. Maybe not. Maybe you've had some time to prepare yourself. But one of the things I would say is to think of this as a grieving process, right? And to know that it might not be fast. It might not be all at once. Monday you might feel great, and Wednesday you might feel horrible, right? So there's no timetable, right? I wouldn't say X is normal and Y isn't, but I would say you might or might not want some time by yourself. It's okay to feel the range of emotions that you feel, and it's okay for it to take time to feel better or feel differently or get new perspective on the situation. And you may be in a financial situation where finding something new is urgent, and therefore assembling, as you put it so well, a team of personal and professional support and growing a little bit of a new network to help you. You might need to do it, within a matter of days or weeks if there's financial pressure to find something new as soon as possible.
I totally agree. And I actually think the longer that you wait in general, the harder it can become. You start to maybe lose some stamina. People forgot about what happened to you versus in the beginning, people are going to have a little more compassion and really want to help out. I think it's almost like a death of a family member. When it first happens, everyone comes to the funeral and shows up, and then all of a sudden they disappear. So it's kind of capitalizing when people are the most willing to help you. But I do think it takes much longer to actually go through the grieving process to feel better. And I'm curious, from what you have seen, how long does it take most people before they kind of feel like themselves again? Is it a month, a year? What's normal?
Well, I think that some of that depends on how long you had the job in question and how much you loved it, right? It's going to take longer to recover maybe from something that you did for 30 years and felt really comfortable in, and it really was under your skin as part of who you are, versus something that you might have, done for 5 years and it was okay, but, you got laid off or some other circumstance happened in your life where you moved or the job moved, and it's okay to move on. I would say at least a couple months, and as long as a year or more, if I were going to generalize.
Yeah, and I don't think even a year or more, I don't think you would be outside of normal. I think that's pretty fair that it can take a long time to heal from that. It can be so dramatic. I mean, I've seen companies, I'm actually working with a client right now who knows that they have a certain amount of time, like a few months or so, before they're going to be laid off. And they have time to prepare and they have time to look for a new job. And they may even find a new job before their old job is finished, I think that's a really different grieving process than like, thank you for your service. Here's your box. We're going to walk you out the front door. Like, it's just, it's such a different way, I think, to treat people, and it takes longer.
Right. And in that situation, like, I think the shock, the anger, the disbelief, right, is something that you have to take in all at once. Whereas if you're in a situation where the company knows, for example, that they're going to downsize or they're going to shift a certain business unit to another place in the country or in the world, and there's a transition process that people are able to go through together, that feels different also. And so I think part of what we're talking about is that there is an important emotional and psychological component, right? There are also the technical aspects and the practical realities of I had a job yesterday, or I had a job last month, and I don't have one now, and I need to deal with that and figure out what to do and take a set of steps. But there's also all of this context that also requires attention in order for you to be successful, both in the transition and in what comes next.
I totally agree. And it's interesting because in the two examples, the one example where you have like 2 months notice versus you have like 5 minutes notice, the company can make the decision for the same reasons. It can be, a cost-saving measure. The company has to. And I feel like when you're the employee that gets 2 months notice, you say, they're treating me with a lot of respect. I understand this decision. You have time to sort of work through it, and you feel like, I took care of them and they're taking care of me, and we're going to make this smooth, versus in the other situation, you're just sort of left to pick up all the pieces by yourself. And it's just such a different way to treat people, I think. I wish companies would think about it more, because I don't know that it would cost them that much more to do it in a way that impacts their employees less, but that's just my soapbox.
It's your podcast. You get to have your soapbox.
Right. Well, so one thing that you mentioned earlier is identity, and kind of having our identity tied up in our work. And I think in a lot of ways, that's actually a really positive thing in a certain degree, because it might mean that you really love what you do and it's something that you're really passionate about. But when we've lost, our job in an unexpected way, and what can we do if our identity is a big part of who we are, if what we do at work, like how can we sort of recover? I actually had someone this week say, I don't know if I can recover. I don't know if I can do anything else because this is who I am. I mean, what would you say to someone that said that?
So I would encourage that person to think about all of the other aspects of his or her identity, right? That's one coaching tool I would use. Like, yes, this is who you are, editor-in-chief of X fabulous publication, or manager of this business group, or creative director of, and that is a big part of who you are. We spend a lot of time at work, most of us, every week, every month, every year. And we also have, whatever family constellation. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a volunteer at the local Boys and Girls Club. I am a super fabulous cook. I love to garden. I volunteer at my farmer's market, right? So what else has been part of your life besides work to help the person see him or herself in a bigger way? And the other little thing that I always recommend is get yourself a business card. get yourself a business card on day one, even if it has your name, your email address, and your phone number, and that's it. Right?
I love that advice. I love it. I actually passed out samples to the folks that I spoke to earlier this week that had just that name, phone, email. And tell me, why do you think that's important? Why should we get a business card?
I think that it helps us in a couple ways. First of all, it allows you to still say, this is who I am, right? You probably had a business card in your last job, and now that's, quote unquote, not you anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's a piece of kind of credentialing that I think is helpful to people. Mm-hmm. And it's a kind of currency that you can use at parties and when you go to coffee meetings and when you go to networking events. It's even harder to say, I'm looking for what's next, if you can't hand out this symbol of professional identity that many of us are used to.
Oh, that's a good way to say it. Symbol of professional identity. I really like that. I think part of it too is when you give a business card, it's almost like an automatic reaction that they give one back to you. And when you're networking, also, that's what you need, and you need people to be able to get a hold of you, because you're looking for something new. And what you definitely don't want is to be in a networking meeting and have someone give you their card, and then you have to explain that you don't have one and why that is, because it just takes you down to a bad place, I think.
Yes, and you make such a great point that it provokes is not the right word, that it invites the other person to give you a card in exchange, right? May I have your card? Here's mine. Because you do want to be collecting those opportunities to then send an email to that person that says, I loved meeting you at X event, or thank you so much for having coffee with me, right? And then you develop this little, what we used to call a Rolodex, which now is probably all in our phones. The one other thing I want to say about that, because I do think it's important both in a practical and a psychological way, is you can make free business cards during your job search, right? When I first started my business, I tried out a few different things because they're really cheap to print now, right? When you spruce up your LinkedIn profile, you can then have one that has your LinkedIn URL on it. If you decide you're looking for a very specific thing or you want to promote a couple specific skills on your card, right? If your job search goes on for, a couple months as it might, if you have a couple different versions of your card, go for it.
I love that because it's easy and it's quick. Do you have a site that you prefer when you order business cards?
I personally use moo.com, M-O-O, like the cow.
Yeah, me too. I love Moo.
But people also use Vistaprint, which is a little cheaper, and you have all kinds of options for designing your own.
Totally. And there's another site that I sometimes use called Gotprint, GOTprint.com, also inexpensive. And then I think if there's anybody listening who feels like you need a little extra help, like you need in person, you need a hand, usually if you go to a FedEx office location that has a big, like a bigger location, they'll have a desk for business cards and they can help you. And they're not as pretty as Moo cards, but somebody will help you and you can get them like the same day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, not to advertise for any certain site, but I know that's one of the tough things. If it's the first time you're making a card, you go, okay, I'm going to make a card, but like now where do I go?
Yep.
So we've gotten through the business card, where we've kind of gotten through the emotional part, and say we're ready to interview. One of the number one things I have seen, and not only in a job interview, but sometimes between, casual acquaintances, is everybody says, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, tell me the scoop. And it's surprising that actually happens in an interview a little bit, but it happens. And so in terms of being prepared, do you have any tips for us? Like, what should we say when someone says, what happened? Like, can you tell me the details? I mean, how should we respond to that?
So I think that this is a really great answer to practice and write down for yourself. You want it to be honest, You want it to be super short. You want it to be as positive as it can be, and you want to return quickly in the interview to a focus on the job you're interviewing for. You definitely do not want to gossip about any former employer, right? I really enjoyed the X number of years that I spent growing at, the company that I left. As you might know, that company recently downsized, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be sitting across from you talking about how I can bring the skills and experiences that I had there to you.
I think that's perfect.
Really short.
And you're right. Write it down and practice, because I have seen job seekers who they're super happy, you're having a great conversation, and then you ask this question and their eyes get kind of glossy, their face gets a little bit red, and, it's a difficult question to answer, and then they try to get back on track after that. And I think if you practice, you can kind of learn to, at least in that moment in the meeting, in the interview, kind of let those feelings go just for the hour that you're there. Because you don't want to kind of start to, get emotional or get upset as you're explaining it in the nice way that you've rehearsed. Right, because that would be tough. Well, so the other issue, I know I've met a number of people lately who have worked at a place for over 15 years or some even over 30 years. And I've got to say, I think about 20 years ago is when Monster kind of came onto the scene. So if we're rewinding to 30 years ago, I mean, that's before the internet was even like a regular thing that you could get at home. If we haven't looked in a really long time, is there anything you would suggest that we should know about the sort of new job search process?
Yeah, I can remember the very last job that I was able to answer an ad in a newspaper. And it probably was 25 years ago. So I think that one thing that people need to be very familiar with is that the job search process now is more online, more virtual, more automated than it ever has been before. Twitter is sometimes a really good place to look for leads, right? And at the same time, you mentioned Monster, that, our job search has become more and more dependent on the internet, on filling in online forms, on being really aware of keywords and things like that. Our networks have become more and more essential to our job search, right? There's this funny bifurcation, I think, between how much job search is online now and how much, because we all still crave, right? This is a people process. We all still crave human contact, knowing the people that we're going to hire, knowing that they're a good fit for our organization. You're still going to rely as much or more on your networks as you did 30 years ago.
I totally agree. I think there's this real misunderstanding that the whole job search process happens online. But like you said, like people still crave personal contact. And, if I'm a hiring manager, which I have been in the past, I first think like, do I know anyone who would be a good fit? Then I think, do I know someone who knows someone? It never crosses my mind like, hey, I wonder who's been applying on the internet that I don't know.
Right.
I mean, that's not the first place I go unless I'm hiring for something so specific that I can't possibly find somebody else. So,
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the job search process has changed less in the last 30 years than we think it has to some degree.
Yeah, it's kind of like this idea of having a business card that we were talking about, right? Like having a certain amount of skill online is in some ways necessary, but it's not sufficient. And as you say, it's definitely not the whole game. And I think for the reason you mentioned, from a hiring manager perspective, like first you think about who you know, then you think about who do I know who knows someone. This is actually what I think makes your LinkedIn profile more important than your resume right now, because it's very easy to say, yes, Angela, I actually know the perfect person for you, let me send you their LinkedIn URL so you can check them out.
I totally agree. And sometimes we tend to be, as job seekers, hesitant to use LinkedIn because it feels like you're just putting all that information out there, but it's the best tool.
It is a really good tool, especially for initial approach.
And it's a great way even to find a hiring manager at a company where you don't have any connections, and see if any of your friends know that person. I mean, it's a great tool for research.
Yep.
Well, so speaking of 30 years, over long periods of time, of course, industries change. And, we were talking a little bit about the newspaper industry in particular, like publishing. And it's changed significantly in the last 30 years. So say we're coming from an industry like that and we're thinking, man, I need to move into a new industry that's a little different. I'm going to have to really rebrand myself, reinvent myself for a new industry. Do you have any tips on where to start? I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
It is. And I want to pick up on two things you said, Angela. One is rebranding and one is reinvention. So in the rebranding, I think you want to look really hard at the skills you've developed in that industry over time, right? Because print newspapers might be dying, but news is not, right? So what are all the things you know about good research and tracking down a story and writing something that doesn't have any spelling errors in it, right? like crafting a fabulous sentence or a fabulous headline, which is actually really a useful skill in the world of social media, right? So just thinking about that industry, what skills do you have that are still applicable across a wide range of industries? I think that's the rebranding piece. The reinvention piece, let's say that you've been writing headlines for a print publication for 30 years and you have never touched Twitter, right? The reinvention is about what are the technologies and what is the knowledge that might be different so that you apply a set of skills learned over time in new ways, either in the reinvention of that industry or in a totally different industry. And I think there are two good ways to go about this that are pretty accessible for people. One is to find yourself a really good volunteer gig or self-defined internship where you can complete a project or spend a certain number of hours every week in an organization that needs your skills, and you can put that on your resume as something that's current or on your LinkedIn profile. The other is to take any kind of class, community college, weekend workshop, whatever you can afford and is available in your community, because it not only teaches you new skills, but it lets you meet new people.
Absolutely. Expands your network again. Well, I love the fact that you said look for opportunities to do volunteering, get a volunteer gig. And oftentimes, I'll talk to job seekers and they'll say, well, I don't work for free. I'm a professional. But yet we would pay to go back to school to have someone teach us the same skill. So, I would really think big picture. You're adding some value to your resume. You may be learning to do something in a slightly different way, and you're getting yourself ready for the next step. And again, you're networking, you're expanding the people that you meet.
Right. And your volunteer supervisor can then be a current reference for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so when you recommend that people go look for a volunteer gig, do you have anything in particular that you recommend in terms of how to find one or how to ask for one?
So I would start by doing a little online research. In most communities, in most bigger communities, you can find a good opportunity through Volunteer Match or through your local United Way. Those are good places to start. You also might live in a community where there is a Boys and Girls Club, a Master Gardening program. If you belong to a faith community, there may be opportunities to volunteer there, either in a direct service or in an administrative capacity. think about what you're interested in and do a little bit of research about what's around you, and think about what you could offer that might be helpful, and make a couple phone calls, send a couple emails. This is actually a great thing, going back to an earlier question, to ask that support network about. Mm-hmm. I think I'm probably going to be in a job search process for the next, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. And I want to be able to give, these 3 skills to an organization that looks like X. Do you know anybody who might need a little project help for the next couple months?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's a great specific ask.
No, it's very specific, and they know how to help you then. I know when, I think it was around 2006, I was doing digital marketing as my career, and I needed to get experience with Facebook because Facebook was still relatively new.
Yep.
And I went to a local nonprofit, and I said, my name is Angela Copeland, because I didn't know them. And I said, I was very direct. I said, I need to learn Facebook, frankly, to put on my resume. And so what I would like to offer to you is I would be happy to write you a strategy document for a Facebook plan, so to speak. I'll work with you to get it aligned to your goals and get feedback on what you're looking for. I will set up your Facebook. I will manage it I set an expectation, I think, of like 90 days. Mm-hmm. And I want to work with you through that process to make sure it's working really well, just how you want. And then after the 90 days, you guys can take it over and manage it from there, and I'll train you. And for me, it was a win-win because I'm getting something out of it. And for them, they're kind of getting like free consulting at the same time. And so they immediately said yes. I only had to approach one organization, and they said absolutely. Now, obviously, I looked for an organization that did not have a Facebook presence. And in today's day and age, you might look for a nonprofit that doesn't tweet a lot or doesn't seem to have a lot of support in social media, if that's the thing that you're interested in, before you approach them. Those are going to be the organizations I think that are most likely to say yes. But anyhow, so I really like that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because this ties back, I know you work a lot on mission-focused organizations. And I will say, like, for example, for those folks coming from like the newspaper industry, they typically work in newspaper because they're passionate about the mission. They're passionate about giving back. I mean, they could have worked somewhere else and made more money, right? But they're doing, publications because they think it's important. Given that, if we're interested to continue to pursue something that is mission-focused in a way, what do you recommend that we do to get started? I mean, how can we look for that?
So if you're already in a mission-focused industry like journalism, you might look for, let's say, a communications-focused job in a nonprofit, right? Like you might write their newsletter and do their internal communications, and as you gave this great example, be their kind of social media person. Like you might apply the skills that you have used as a journalist, as a writer, as a headline specialist in just a nonprofit organization rather than at the for-profit newspaper that does, also have a mission focus. If you're leaving a different kind of corporate environment that thinks more of a financial bottom line than a mission-driven bottom line, let's say, if you're really doing a sector switch, I would say that the strategy that you and I talked about a minute ago in terms of volunteering for something that looks similar to the job that you want to get is even more important, right? If, as a hiring manager, if I'm looking at a resume for someone who is shifting from the for-profit sector to the nonprofit sector, I'm usually looking for what kind of board service or other volunteer service do you have? Like, how can I see that this has been a passion for you all along, and now you're just looking to apply your professional skills to that in a new and more intense way? And if that doesn't show up anywhere in your profile, you want to think about how you can create a bridge between the experience you've had before and how you're going to apply it to a different kind of environment. There's a really great book that I would recommend for that situation called Mission Driven, Moving from Profit to Purpose. It gives a really great overview of how the nonprofit sector is organized and how you can figure out whether you're a good match for that kind of sector switch. And I think for anyone, Angela, I would really recommend the Encore Career Handbook, How to Make a Living and a Difference in the Second Half of Life. It's really helpful, especially for mid and late career people who are looking for purpose-focused work.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think you're right. You know, you mentioned bridging and making the bridge. I know for myself, when I was working in for-profit and I interviewed at nonprofits, eventually I worked at a nonprofit for a while, you always get the question, like, how could you possibly work at a nonprofit? You've never worked here for this kind of organization before. And it can feel kind of offensive almost, the way that it comes at you so fast. But I think you have to remember it's your job to kind of sell yourself and to talk about those transferable skills and to kind of convince the person to see it, you know, see why you're a good fit. It's not guaranteed that they're going to see it right away. So you've got to practice that elevator pitch and the narrative so that you're prepared to kind of get them to see the bridge, you know, of your skills, like you said.
Yes, and I think that thinking about it as a narrative is a really great frame for people, because in any interview, you're telling a story of how you're going to get from where you were to being a contributor at this organization that who's interviewing you, right? There's always a, then to now story. I've done this, I've accomplished this, I value this, and here's how I can be a really great fit for you and what you're telling me that you need.
And I think also you mentioned the word contributor and what you're going to contribute. Walking into those interviews and thinking about the things that you bring to the table as opposed to focusing on the things that maybe you don't have or the things where you feel like you're lacking. I think a lot of times, especially if it's an unplanned change, or even sometimes a planned change, when we switch industries, we think, I'm not good enough, or, we get really negative and we assume we're going to have to start at the very bottom because we don't have anything to offer. But I think, it's refocus on the things that you do have to offer and the experience that you are bringing to the table, and focus on those positive things so that the other person will see that in you as opposed to just being really down about the situation.
Yes, and when I hear you say that, I think when you haven't interviewed for a long time, I think it can sometimes be hard to talk about yourself in that way. And that's a good place to ask for help, again, from both your personal and professional network to get feedback on what other people see as your skill, not just your skills, but the qualities that you bring into a team environment. If you have access to your like an alumni career office, or again, like a community college kind of support for like taking a couple assessments of skills and leadership style, for example. Sometimes you can do that at a relatively low cost, and it can help you develop new language for talking about what you know and who you are in an interview setting.
I totally agree with that. It's a really good point. Somebody actually asked me this week, they said it feels like bragging, talking about myself. But, well, first of all, you don't want to come across bragging, but a lot of times what you're just laying out are facts about yourself and your leadership style. And that's what you have to do, because that's how you communicate about yourself. Like, no one's going to come with you to the interview to sort of be your salesperson. Like, you have to be your own salesperson. Yes. Well, Michelle, this has been excellent. I think this is such an important topic. I'm really glad we got to talk about it, especially this week. If we're listening today and we'd like to learn more about you, where should we go?
Listeners can visit my website at michellehynes.com. Like you, Angela, I write a blog somewhat occasionally. And I'm also on Twitter, mHynesPDX, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, I will include all those links in the show notes. And Michelle, thank you again for joining me. This has been great.
Thanks so much, Angela. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to angela@copelandcoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach. And on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out, subscribe on iTunes, and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.